Good evening, MOCA friends. I'm Neil Gibbs, Chief of Staff at the Museum of Chinese America. We hope you are feeling safe and taking good care of yourself and your loved ones. Lunar New Year is coming. This year is the year of the tiger, and it starts on February 1st, 2022. 再见, Year of the Ox. Since Lunar New Year is a time for new beginnings and family gatherings, we want to start celebrating with you, the MOCA family. MOCA proudly presents Virtual MOCA Fest 2022, the museum's annual celebration of the Lunar New Year. This evening, MOCA is thrilled to have you join us virtually and learn the secret to baking your own delicious Chocolate-Hazelnut Macau-Style Cookies for Lunar New Year. Drawn from the critically acclaimed Mooncakes and Milk Bread, sweet and savory recipes inspired by Chinese Bakeries. This recipe was crafted by Kristina Cho, cookbook author, recipe developer, food stylist, and photographer. Once these delicious cookies are in the oven, Kristina will share the stories and talk about the experience of writing her cookbook with chef Kim Lam Ko, author of the award-winning cookbook, Phoenix Clouds and Jade Trees, Essential Techniques of Authentic Chinese Cooking. Furthermore, as we just entered the 2022 calendar year, there's so much that we are grateful at MOCA. Visitors and critics have lauded our exhibition Responses, Asian American Voices Resisting the Tides of Racism, which launched in July 2021. Because of the success of Responses, we're extending the exhibition through March 2022 with free admission. So we invite you to visit the museum during Lunar New Year. If we enjoy this public program, we hope you will consider making a gift to become part of a continuing lifeline for MOCA. No amount is too little, and we greatly appreciate your generosity. Your contribution helps sustain our beloved institution and supports the creation of new online programming that will bring comfort and inspiration to more communities. Lastly, this program is brought to you by MOCA friends and partners, including Bloomberg Philanthropies. This program is also supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Without further ado, I will let our moderator, Kim, to introduce our guest, Kristina. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight. It's really a great honor to have Kristina Cho with us tonight. And she is an amazing cookbook author from the Bay Area. And her new book called Mooncakes and Milk Bread. It was published. When was it published? But a few months ago, right?
It was published in October.
October, yeah.
A week ago, and
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it was published in October, and it just finally got restocked like 2 days ago.
That's amazing that it was all sold out. And so it's really an honor to have you here with us to share some of your tips of baking and so on. So why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and so on.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristina Cho. I'm the author of Mooncakes and Milk Bread. Before working in food, I actually had a career in design and architecture, which you might be able to see a little bit of that influence while flipping through the book. I love combining developing recipes with a little bit of like artistry and making sure like baked goods and cookies have that kind of like extra layer of detail and finesse in them. I currently live in the Bay Area, but I'm actually originally from Cleveland, Ohio. That's where I was born and raised. I have a lot of Midwestern influence in a sense. Both my parents and their families are from Hong Kong. So I also have a lot of Chinese food and like Cantonese style cooking, like running through my family. And that's the type of food I grew up on. My grandparents had a restaurant growing up, so there was just a lot of food going on in my family. So it's not super surprising that now I have found a career path making food for a living.
That's amazing, and definitely your design architectural background shows through your cookbook, because some of the pictures and your presentation are just amazing. So I would say that let's get started with your demo about, on how to make this amazingly sounding chocolate hazelnut Macau-style cookies. And then after that, we can chat a little bit more about, how you came about getting into the this culinary business, and how do you come about to writing the cookbook and so on. So tell us a little bit more about your the cookie recipes, and where did it come from? the inspiration.
So this is like a very, it's like a particular cookie. I grew up eating like kind of two styles of almond cookies. My grandpa has a recipe, or his recipes in the book for Gong Gong's almond cookies, but those are a little bit more of a traditional cookie where they're a little crispy on the outside. They're made with flour, so it's like a normal cookie. But then I also had Macau-style almond cookies a lot of times, especially during Lunar New Year. My grandma would set out a plate of them, and if you've ever had them before, they're so unique in texture. They are really crumbly and kind of have that like melt in your mouth texture to them. They're typically made with mung bean flour and also almond flour in there, and with a little bit of lard as the fat to bind it all together. These are they're inspired by those cookies, but I wanted to kind of create like a modern take on them, using hazelnut flour, some cocoa powder, and then Kanako. Kanako is, I saw a question for that, and Kanako is roasted soybean flour. So I have like the last of my bag here. I decided to use Kanako instead of mung bean flour here because I personally can never find mung bean flour. Even at like 99 Ranch or any like local Asian grocery store, there's plenty of them in the Bay Area, but I can like always find Kanako, even like some Whole Foods or regular grocery stores. But you can find this pretty commonly. It's gluten-free, it's not the same as flour, it's literally soybeans ground up. And a lot of times you see this in like Japanese desserts, like dusted on mochi or something like that. It has almost like a peanut butter flavor in there that complements the hazelnut flour and the cocoa powder really, really well. And when you eat a cookie, I initially brought back memories of eating like Ferrero Rochers, which my family always had during Lunar New Year because they were like sweet and like round golden things. And so I liked how that all tied together as a story. So to make it, I have some hazelnut flour here. I have 1 1/4 cup. But if you have a digital scale to weigh everything, I highly recommend it. The book has both those measurements on there. So this is 155 grams of hazelnut flour.
Yeah.
And we're going to add 70 grams, which is 3/4 of a cup of Kanako in here. We're just going to be dumping everything into this bowl. We're going to add our cocoa powder, 2 tablespoons. Then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. The cornstarch is going to add to that kind of like really crumbly, melt in your mouth texture. I would not substitute, actually wouldn't really substitute any of these ingredients with something else. Like you want to use confectioner sugar, powdered sugar, instead of like granulated sugar or brown sugar, because they all behave differently in your baked goods. Okay. And then we're going to add some confectioner sugar in here. And then 1/2 teaspoon of salt, because anything sweet needs a little bit of salt to balance everything.
Yeah, salt will always bring the flavor out for any street dishes, actually. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you're just going to take a whisk and just mix everything in there so that it looks like homogeneous. You can see how there's a few kind of like bigger clumps of confectioner sugar. So you want to kind of like focus on those. If you wanted to sift it, you can, but I didn't include that in the directions because like ultimately once we like mix our dough together, it's not a huge deal if you have a few kind of like pebbles in there. So, all right. And it smells really good already. And this is one of the few, I always forget about it, how like this is one of the few recipes that's actually gluten-free because we're using hazelnut flour and Kanako as the kind of bulk here. So if you have any gluten-free friends, you can make these for them.
So there was a quick question about what if you don't have a mooncake mold? Can you use other kind of mold or anything?
there might be some other molds out there, but if you wanted to just like, they won't be as pretty, but if you wanted to just like make a ball and like flatten it a little bit, you can bake it that way.
What about those small little patisserie, mold?
You can do that too. Yeah, with like a little bit of a groove in it.
Right,
you can do that, and that's actually like a really great idea because you don't have to, like, the mold is a little bit tricky in a sense that you have to get the right pressure applied to it to get the
correct.
Have those grooved or fluted like tart molds.
The tart molds, right? Yeah.
Get in the mold so it has that structure. That's actually a really good idea.
Sounds good.
So this is all of our dry ingredients. I'm gonna get my shortening out of the fridge. I have it chilled. It doesn't need to be super cold, but I find that chilling it just kind of helps it incorporate a little bit better. And I just discovered something as I was, I made a little bit of a batch before. And when I was developing this recipe, I was using Crisco brand shortening the entire time because that's the most commonly found shortening, at least for me. You can get it at like most every grocery store. I actually bought a different brand. It's called like Spectrum, and I could immediately tell that it didn't quite have the same like fat content in a way, just like based on the texture. And so when I added it to the dough, it immediately kind of felt a little bit too dry. And so if you're making this or you're gonna make it later, I highly recommend using Crisco because that's what it was tested with. And you'll see in a little bit, I just compensated for it by, like, if you use a different type of shortening, you can just add a little bit more, like increase it from 70 grams to like 100 or 110 and see how it behaves. When baking, there's a lot of science behind it, like wanting to weigh everything, have everything at the right temperatures, but then there's also a little bit of intuition. You want to be able to see that the dough is the right texture. Like if a recipe tells you that the dough should be able to clump together when you pinch it and it's not doing that, then just like, like figure out a little bit, like maybe add a little bit more fat or liquid, whatever is called for in the recipe. Okay, so I have the shortening in here, and if you don't have, this is just like a pastry cutter that kind of breaks it up. You can just use your fingertips and break it all up in here. But I'm gonna use the pastry cutter and just kind of chop up the shortening into little pieces, and it's going to start working its way into all that like hazelnut flour, kanako, all the dry ingredients here. And at first, it will look pretty dry, but you're looking for a texture that resembles wet sand. You know how it's like still crumbly, but if you press it together, it holds some type of shape. I think I saw a question pop up about like maybe using like a vegetable oil or something like that as the fat instead. And again, like I don't recommend.
And also there was a question about butter. Can you use butter for shortening?
Yeah, so butter and shortening in some recipes are able to kind of like, you can substitute it like a lot of times like pastry and things like that. For this, it behaves best with a fat that can stay more solid, like even at like room temperature or when it's like a little warm. So I would just stick to like vegetable shortening. If you wanted to use lard, like that's like a pretty traditional thing. Like I don't have any lard in the book because
I was going to ask you about that because lard is the go-to fat for Chinese cooking. How does that work in your recipe, or does it?
It could work in here. I personally don't bake with a lot of lard because I actually just went to one of my local grocery stores in Richmond where I live, and they had a whole display of lard. I'm like, I've never seen so much lard before. But I kind of just took like a poll of my friends and like other bakers like out there, and like how accessible is like tubs of lard for you to find. And I got kind of like mixed results. And like for me as a recipe developer, I try to do a balance of like, what are the most accessible ingredients that get you the final product that's close to what you want as possible. So I ultimately made the decision to like not include any lard in the recipes and just use butter or shortening. So.
Uh-huh. Oh, and then another question that popped up. What about ghee?
I would just stick to shortening. Stick to shortening. You can use oil maybe.
Right.
That's gonna give you another flavor. Okay.
Right.
So you can see here, I just tested it. So you see how it's like kind of floury here, but if you grab a little bit, it like holds together, like just like that. Okay, and this amount of like dough, essentially, even though it like looks really floury, is gonna make like 10 big cookies, and we're gonna use a mooncake mold to get those cookies. So I just eyeball it. If you wanted to weigh it out, each dough ball is about like 40 grams or so, but you just want it to be about golf ball size. So I'm just taking a little bit of dough, pressing it together. If it's not holding as a ball like this, then you want to add a little bit more shortening.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not a big deal. You can always adjust later.
Right.
Okay. So make a ball, and then I have just right here, I have a baking sheet that's lined with some parchment paper, and I'm going to place my dough balls on there. You want to give them a little bit of room, like 3 inches, because when we use the mooncake mold, it's going to squish it down and make it spread a little. Okay. I'm going to make 2 more. And my oven is preheated right now to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a fairly low baking temperature, but you're gonna see, like once you bake them, or if you look at the book, the cookies, they don't really spread that much. And even while they're cooking, they don't really look like they're changing too much. You're like allowing the fat and the hazelnut flour to kind of just like set up. So it's a low temperature.
So speaking of mooncake mold, I presume that you'll be using one of those plastic ones that you can push through. How do you feel about those traditional one that is a wooden mold? How does it work for you?
I think they're fine. I think they're really beautiful. But I think it takes a lot of finesse to get them to work. You want to be like, I remember when I first started on my like mooncake making journey, I asked my grandma if she's ever made them before, and she sort of just like laughed at me. She was like, you can't do this. Like it's like only like a true master, someone who's been like making mooncakes their entire life can do it. And I think like maybe that's the case if you're only sticking to like the wooden ones, because they are a little tricky. Like you have to get the dough the right consistency, the right temperature almost, so it doesn't stick, and you have to like whack it to like get the mooncakes out. And mooncakes are already like such a delicate thing to make, especially these. I could never even imagine making these with the wooden ones, because whacking it would just like cause the cookie to crumble,
disintegrate.
And I think that the plastic ones are really versatile. You can switch out different designs in them. Typically, like you can buy a mooncake mold and it comes with like 4 to 6 different designs, so you can kind of get a little bit creative with that. So I'm going to wash my hands really quick, and then we're going to stamp a few of these cookies. Okay. So my mooncake mold, where is it? I'm going to be using a 100-gram mooncake mold. It's one of like the bigger ones, and using a square one. They can also just use a round one or whatever shape. Mooncake molds are coming in like all sorts of shapes and sizes these days. Okay, so I have a couple balls here. Some are rolled out a little cleaner than others, but that's okay. So one of the things to watch out for is preventing the dough from getting stuck in the grooves or the carving of your mooncake mold. So to help that, we're going to dust both the mold and the cookies with some confectionery sugar. And it's just gonna make your cookies like a little bit like extra sweet. Oh, sorry. Let me squish them down a little bit, just like that. You want them, when I was making them, they kind of look like falafel or like little like veggie burgers or something. But they're sweet and chocolatey. So flatten them and then do like a liberal dusting, like around the sides and on the top. And it's going to give it a slight kind of like non-stick effect and add a little bit more sweetness to your cookies.
So you're dusting a lot of the confectioner's sugar there.
Yeah, you want to do like a decent amount just to prevent it from
sticking. Yeah.
Prevent it from sticking. Okay. And I'm also going to dust the mold now. If anyone has the book and has tried making like the regular mooncakes using the mold, that dough specifically like is not sticky at all. Like there's a decent amount of oil in the dough that kind of creates that like non-stick effect. So I don't do this with other things.
Oh, for mooncake you don't, yeah.
Okay, so I have that, and then cross my fingers that it doesn't stick, but you're gonna kind of put the mold over the round. Okay, and make sure you have like a steady surface and push down on the plunger. Apply like a decent amount of pressure, you know, like don't be too shy about it. And then release. I see that it kind of just like came up. And then I lift it a little bit off the paper. Then I press down on the plunger again, just to kind of like wiggle the cookie out. Ooh, that one came out really well. Okay, here, I'll do.
Ooh, that looks beautiful. Oh, wow.
That is what you're looking for.
That is beautiful.
Again, if your dough is too crumbly, like I'm very concerned about like using that shortening. I was like, oh, I hope people use Crisco. If it's too crumbly, put it back in the bowl, add more shortening until it can kind of like hold it together. If it's too crumbly, you can fix it. Okay, so let me stamp the rest real quick. Oh, and I dust in between, you know, just extra insurance that it's not going to stick. Nice. And it takes a little bit of practice. Like I made a batch earlier today, and my first mooncake, like it takes a little bit of practice to know how much pressure you need to apply to get like the dough spread out evenly. So, and if you have a smaller mooncake mold or maybe even like a bigger mooncake mold, then just adjust how much dough you want to put in there. You don't only have to use a 100 gram. And I'll leave the last two like unstamped, I guess. Like that's something you could do. Like if you didn't have a mold or anything, you can just like form it into a mound, kind of like a standard cookie. And you don't even have to powder sugar it. You just leave it there and it'll bake up just the same.
So there's a lot of questions about substitution because it sounded like people were not able to get many of the ingredients. There was like questions about almond powder instead of mung bean powder.
For the hazelnut flour, you can substitute that with like another nut flour if you want it.
Right.
Like almond flour, you can do that instead. I find that almond flour is a little bit chewier. Like whenever I bake with it, it's a little bit chewier than hazelnut flour. If you can actually find mung bean flour, then I think you can substitute the Kanako or the
Kanako, right?
If you think about it, I just substituted like one bean with another bean, in a sense.
Right.
You can do that, but I wouldn't like substitute it with like a gluten-free flour or just normal flour. It's just not going to behave the same way or get
right.
Okay, so I have these like stamped out, and then I'm just going to bake them for 25 minutes at 300 degrees, like low and slow. And you put it in there. And when they come out, resist the urge. I did it because I instinctively, like whenever I bake something, I like touch it just to like really like lightly just see like how it feels, what it's set like, especially if it's a cake like in the middle. For these, like resist the urge to touch. I did it and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Just because you can see here, they grow just a little bit, but you can still see the imprint. When they're fresh out of the oven, they are actually still very soft. And they need, and because you have shortening in here, you need like to let the cookies cool fully before like trying to move them or touch them, because otherwise they're gonna like fall apart. But let me just give this might need a little bit more. This needs a little bit more time. It normally takes about 45 minutes, and these came out of the oven like 20 minutes ago, or right before this thing started. So I'm gonna let them off just a little bit before I attempt to move them. So that's it.
So actually that, I mean, you make it look so simple.
The hardest part is finding ingredients, for sure.
That's true. It sounded like that's the case, but I know the inspiration from the original Macau-style almond cookies, and it, you know, I'm sure this will come out like amazing because of the chocolate and the hazelnut. Just that combination alone, it sounded like wonderful. So so yeah. So anyway, now that we've done with the cooking demo, well, let's talk a little bit about your book and how did it come about? Because I do understand that your you know, your grandpa was in the restaurant business, and so you've been exposed to food all your life and so on, and you know, but how did it come about that you wanted to do baked goods? Why baked goods?
It was like a unique journey to like kind of settle, or not settle, but to like decide to write a book about Chinese baking. It's my first book. So,
Right.
and at the time I was contemplating about writing a book. I was also in the process of deciding to leave my career in design. So it was like a lot of kind of like big decisions about my life at that time. While I was working as a designer in San Francisco, I was working on my food blog and my Instagram, kind of as a hobby.
So you had a very successful food blog as well before the book came about, right?
I feel like successful is like a relative term. Like people keep saying that, but like I personally felt like at the time, and this was like in early 2019, I felt like I was like a nobody. You know, I was just, I had like a humble following, but I remember I started to share a few recipes like for different like milk bread based baked buns. I remember specifically when I posted a recipe for the hot dog flour buns on my Instagram and on my blog, I got like so many messages, like more than I normally would for just sharing like just like a normal recipe. But like that one, like people were so kind of like had this like reaction to it. They're like, oh my God, like we need more of this. It's just brought back so much of my childhood. I never even had the idea that I could make this on my own. So that kind of got the ball rolling about like, oh, like maybe a book like this should exist. And at that same time, my current literary agent reached out to me about just like developing some type of book proposal. So all of that stuff kind of happened within like the same month, leaving my job, getting an agent, like all this stuff, making the buns. And I felt like a book about Chinese baking needed to exist. Just doing some research, there wasn't like anything comparable out there that like comprehensively covered the recipe and also like the culture that surrounds Chinese baking. Like maybe in some recipes you might get like like maybe an egg tart recipe in the dessert section, like that, like really piecemeal. So I pursued that and was able to get a book deal with my current publisher that was like very supportive of the idea.
So I'm curious about the name of the title of the book. So why did you pick Mooncake and Milk Bread as the title of the book?
I had a very long list of really horrible cookbooks. It was like actually like my agent like kind of helped me come up with this, like just something like catchy, but also like still meaningful and like talk
Right.
about the contents of the book.
Uh-huh.
But I really liked the dichotomy of those two things, like mooncakes, something that I would consider a very traditional Chinese recipe, a Chinese thing
Right.
that like
Mhm.
people have been making for a very, very long time. And then that contrasted with milk bread, which is like very important, very integral, and just like a part of Chinese culture, but relatively new in our history in a way. Having it being originated kind of like in Hong Kong, and like that style of bakery being really popular in like the 50s and 60s and stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I really liked those two recipes kind of like bookending, like what's in the book. Like there's traditional things and there's like newer adapted things that are just like byproducts of like our culture and our lifestyle now, and it's constantly evolving.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's like
Well,
alliteration, it sounds good together.
I know that actually it's a very nice title. I actually like it. You know, in Chinese home cooking, baking is not a big repertoire in home cooking. So very often, even in Asia, as you may also know, that in a home kitchen there is no oven. So how do you feel about this interest in Chinese baking stuff now, and where did that come from?
Yeah, I think that the tradition of home baking in a lot of like Chinese families or Chinese American families is like a relatively new thing, because it originates back to like apartments in Hong Kong that like didn't have ovens, like purely to like save space. Like that's like my architecture coming back into it, you know, like there's like cooktops or it's just ovens weren't like a common thing. So I think a lot of the traditional kind of like breads and stuff like that, you find them like fried or like
Mm,
skillet, like baked like on a flat top kind of, you
mhm,
know, or like cakes that are steamed. And so that's kind of like the more traditional side. But then like with like a new generation of people who have immigrated to the United States and like live in like American homes and kitchens that have ovens now and are kind of learning how to use it. Growing up, my grandma never, like, I don't think has ever turned her oven on. It was always just a storage cabinet that she would put
mm,
her extra like pots and pans in. So she still never used it. But then like my mom had like started to like use the oven to make like roast pork and like different meats and things like that, and like kind of learn how to bake. And then like I like really embrace the idea of using the oven as part of my own baking journey. So I think that's why like right now there's a lot of excitement about like the types of recipes that are in mooncakes and milk bread, because there's this like new generation, like maybe my generation, a little older or
mhm,
younger, that are excited to finally make these things in an oven
mhm.
that remind them of their childhood or remind them of other relatives of their childhood.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, actually, a lot of these baked goods mostly are made commercially in a bake
That,
shops. Yeah, and I think that's probably also one of the reasons why your grandma said you can't make mooncake at home
yeah, exactly.
because
There's always
it's
like
just they always think of going out and buying in the big shops and you know I noticed in your book you you know presented a couple of bakeries you know in your book and you interviewed some of those bakeries bakery owners and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found out about the you know the bakeries and what their owners inspiration and how did it came about and so on?
Yeah, I think it's like kind of a unique feature of my book that I have these like bakery like interviews or highlights
Mm-hmm.
in my book. But I just like felt like it was really important um, with this book that's like covering this topic for the first time to add some context of like where
Mm-hmm.
a bowl bao comes from, or like where the majority of people have gotten them from before. And so I interviewed different bakery owners in different kind of Chinatowns across the United States. I visited like, well, now I visited like all of them like in real life, but while I was writing the book, I wrote the book during the pandemic, and I was intending on like traveling to more bakeries, like to other cities with my mom. Like it was just like a thing we were going to do, but then the pandemic kind of canceled all that. So, but I was still able to manage to get these interviews and speak to the owners. A lot of them are the original owners, or maybe like their children or grandchildren that are continuing the business. Like they are all like, if not the oldest bakery in their respective Chinatown, or one of the most prolific ones in their Chinatown. And I think that kind of just speaks to like the type of culture and community that lives within a Chinese bakery. For a lot of people, it's part of their everyday life. They stop there and grab one for breakfast, or maybe that's like where they sit with their friends and like chat for hours. Like I always remember going to them and like hearing like the aunties and uncles just like gossiping. Like it was just like always really loud of them like talking about whatever they're talking about that day. So it's a very like, there's like a buzz to like the community there. And so I wanted to try and capture the stories and include that into the book, because a lot of people might not have ever been to a Chinese bakery before. And I tried my best to like recreate that space and energy for them just via words.
Great. Did you talk to them about if there's any new inspiration after moving to America in their baked goods? Do they have any kind of American inspiration out of that?
I think so. I think like specifically like one that stands out to me a lot is like I interviewed the daughter of the owner of like Fei Da, which like you're in New York, and so like you probably have like a Fei Da before. And I felt like them specifically, like they have like a whole kind of like R&D like team. It's like her, you know, that is kind of like always like researching like new flavor combinations. They have like seasonal things that they offer while still maintaining the classics, because they still respect like the community that is always going there. And I think that there's like tons of bakeries now that are doing that. And even the traditional ones have probably done that in a sense, just whenever they landed in America and kind of like assimilating or integrating themselves into like the community that they're in, and like making things that please their customer base, like whether or not that like non-Asian people, you know, like they all told me that they like the number one thing with like everyone, like Asian or non-Asian, are like barbecue pork buns. And so they kind of like love to adapt on that, I guess, you know. So
yeah, I can see that being very popular. I love them too.
My dad is like his favorite. Like I asked him like what his favorite one was, and he's never like given me an answer so quickly and so directly.
So now milk bread, right? Is that a specific kind of process? Why is it called milk bread? Is that something that is different in the Chinese way of making bread versus like the Western bread?
Yeah, a little bit. Well, yes and no. So like milk bread is the traditional base for like all of the baked buns at Chinese bakeries, and it's called milk bread. There's a lot of milk in it, but milk bread like really is just like an enriched dough. And there's other enriched doughs at other bakeries, like brioche is an enriched dough. Challah is a enriched dough, but like maybe some of them lean heavier on eggs for their richness. Other ones lean heavier on butter for their richness. But like milk bread leans into the milk. And in my recipe, I use milk in the tongzong, which is like this kind of like starter in a way. It's an extra step that I think is like really valuable to do, because it allows the texture of the bread to stay really soft for a long time. Cook milk.
Can you elaborate a little bit about what tangzong is?
Yeah, you in like a saucepan, you're literally just combining milk and flour together. I think it's like 5 parts milk, 1 part flour, and you kind of cook it into this like roux / paste. And what you're doing is like you're allowing the starches in the milk and the starches in the flour to gelatinize with the milk. You get this paste that's just, like, think of it as like like a hyper concentration of moisture and fat that does not weigh down your dough. And so that's why milk bread it's actually a really easy to handle dough if you make it right. Like it's really like you can stretch it to all these different shapes and it stays really soft without you like adding too much liquid into it. Because if you add too much, then your dough is gonna be really sticky and really difficult to bread. So that's kind of like the magic of it. Like some people make milk bread without the tongzong, but I don't see the point. I don't know. Like I think like you really should have that in there for it to truly be the bread that we like know and love at Chinese bakeries.
Right, at Chinese bakery, right. Yeah, I think I mean that is one of the things that I know that's a little bit very unique in Asian bread making is that the tangzong makes it a lot fluffier and very, very soft, and that's the characteristic in a Chinese bakery. Yeah. So now, once the book was published, what is the reaction so far? I mean, I know it's been widely acclaimed, but what is the reaction from your readers, from people that is tested that use your recipes?
Yeah, it has been really incredible, and it has had such like a warm and like for me like a very emotional like welcoming having it in the world. I think having this book out in the world just like really solidified how much Asian Americans, like not even just Chinese people, like was looking for something like this to reflect this facet of our culture. So that was really, I get emotional thinking about it now that like I had the I guess like honor of doing that. Like it's really rare, I think, like nowadays to like write a book on like a topic for the first time. Even in 2021, 2022. So I feel really honored that I had that ability to do it. And I think so like within the community, people have been loving it. It's been a really like bakeable book. Like a lot of people are baking from it, which was like my goal. Like I didn't want it to be like a book that you buy because it's like pretty or you just leave it on your table or anything like that. Like actually using it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it speaks to like how the recipes are written and how the ingredient lists are put together in like a really approachable and accessible way. One of my fears when it came out was that some people might see like Chinese baking as something like had too many ingredients that are really hard to get. But like the milk bread, you don't need anything from an Asian market.
Correct.
In bolo bao or gai mai bao, like the two like iconic baked goods that you see at a Chinese bakery, like you do not need to go to an Asian bakery. And I think that just like a lot of people's minds to dabbling in Asian baking. Right.
You mentioned bolo bao. I mean, that's like the iconic pineapple bun, right?
Yeah.
But there is no pineapple in it. So can you explain what the name?
If you haven't had a pineapple bun before, it is like, if not the most iconic like bun at a Chinese bakery. It was one of those things, one of those recipes that like I absolutely needed to have in the book, because a Chinese baking book wouldn't be a Chinese baking book
complete, right?
So these are the bolo bao or pineapple bun, and they get their name because of their crust. So there's no actual pineapple in it, although you could do that. You can make like a pineapple jam or like pineapple custard or something like that and stuff them in there, and that would be really good. But they get their name from the topping. And so some bolo bao has like the crisscross that you like actually cut in there. And I do that because I'm like a control freak, and I like to be able to control the pattern on my buns. But if you don't want to score it, it will naturally just kind of like crackle on its own and has like a really beautiful kind of coarse texture that also resembles the skin of a pineapple.
And that's why they're called pineapple buns.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, great. Somebody actually asked in the question that where would you recommend places that to get these ingredients, like like the kinako and mung bean flours, whatever that's required sometimes. Where would you find these? Do you have any suggestion as to where people can buy them?
Yeah. So it's dependent on where you live, and I totally understand that like not everyone lives within like or lives closely to like an Asian grocery store or anything like that. But like if you do, like if you're in New York and San Francisco, they're pretty abundant. So you can go to like a 99 Ranch, just like see what Chinese grocery store is nearby. But like also a lot of like Korean markets or a Japanese market. Like a Japanese market would definitely have kanako because it's like more of a Japanese ingredient. So just like don't be limited to like only Chinese grocery stores. There's a lot of crossover between the two. But if you really don't live near one, there's always like the internet. Like I've ordered like during the pandemic where I was like really trying not to go to the grocery store so much, I was ordering glutinous rice flour and kanako like from Amazon or like all these other websites now that kind of cater to like the Asian grocery store like
Right.
stuff like that. So just do a little bit of like internet research and you should be able to find
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that for me, generally also the internet is a great source for many of these quote unquote, more exotic ingredients, and it is possible to find them. There's one other question is so you cool it down for how many minutes? 40, 45 minutes or something? You said before because okay, just want to make sure. So with your readers, do you find that most of your readers are actually Chinese readers or American or Chinese American?
I think it's like I think I've learned that I have very diverse readership.
Okay.
And I think that's, well, I definitely like, I can see that there's like a lot of like Asian Americans that read the book or follow me and engage with me. But I think I have a pretty diverse audience. I think because I always try to like, I don't know, share culture or share recipes, again, in a very accessible and like relatable way. I think it's a lot to do with like me growing up in Ohio in a sense, kind of like being immersed in that culture for so long. Like I take inspiration from like everywhere that I've lived and have spent time in, and kind of, I don't like only do like only Chinese food. I like do like a mix of everything.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of question and not being able to find the ingredients here. So you mentioned earlier that the hazelnut can be substituted with any kind of other nuts, I guess. Like that's why you can do almond flour as well, or but let's see. They also want to and also the mung bean. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say that the hazelnut flour, like mine's from Bob's Red Mill. So that is like fairly easy to get at like
right.
At like Whole Foods. Like they're the only hazelnut flour like I ever get.
Okay.
So yeah, you can order directly from them too.
Yeah.
My second batch of cookies has like 90 seconds left, so I'll be taking them out.
Okay, so you'll be able to take them out. Okay, this somebody says I've used tangzhong a billion times for milk bread, but no idea how to translate it into English other than a flour slurry. Anyone has a better definition of actual word?
I don't know about the actual word, but I think like literally the actual word kind of translates into like sugar, like paste or something like that.
No, I think it's a tongue. I think in China, this is what I know from the Chinese. The tongue is actually the soup tongue.
Okay, got
zhong,
it. Yeah.
and the zhong is actually the like the mother. So it's I guess it's a dough, the mother of the dough. I guess that's what.
So you can call it a starter. Like I know.
Yeah, starter. Yeah, I would use. I guess that's a good. I guess that's a good word. You can use the flour starter as, but it's not a restarter though.
Yeah, it's not like literally a starter in the sense that like a sourdough starter.
Right.
I don't really call it a starter that often either, but I guess it does. Milk bread does originate from it because like you need.
Oh, somebody suggested that maybe you can call it roux.
Yeah,
except roux is usually is fat and flour usually, no?
Yeah.
Rather than water and flour. Oh, that looks wonderful.
I'm gonna put these over here. I want to give my baked cookies like a little wiggle.
Yeah. So somebody else also asked about the bake time. So the bake time is about 20-25 minutes. Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's 25 minutes, and then take them out and don't touch them. They're going to be really soft still and still need to set. They taste really good.
So now, what about your flavor inspiration? Oh, that looks wonderful.
Yeah, and again, be prepared. They're not like, they're a unique cookie. They're gonna be really crumbly. Like if you had a real like cookie, like my grandma, she would like when she would set them out, she would be like watching when people would grab one to make sure that they had like a napkin.
Because it'll crumble when you bite into it, right?
Yeah.
You know, I love a lot of the different flavors that you put into your recipes in your book. Can you talk a little bit about how that, you know, how what inspired you in some of these flavors and how you mix and match them?
Yeah. So I guess I already touched on it a little bit earlier about how like there were some recipes that absolutely needed to exist in the book in order for the book to be considered a Chinese baking book. But then I also allowed a lot of room for kind of like the more like new interpretations of like buns and other baked goods. I really wanted to take kind of like either like the flavor profiles or the technique that I see a lot at Chinese bakeries, but maybe incorporate it with something else that like I love in my life, growing up in Ohio or in California or something like that. Like I have like a salted egg yolk donut in there that like a donut for me feels like very American, just like a classic, just like filled donut or a jelly donut or something like that. But I love like a custard filled bread or donut a lot of times. And salted egg yolk is also like a very common flavor profile in both savory and sweet things in Chinese cooking. And so I made like a salted egg yolk pastry cream, and it is so delicious. Like because like the egg of the salted egg yolk works with the egg and like put in the pastry cream. And then like having it encased in like a sweet puffy dough was like really amazing. So that was like one hybrid. That I have like a pizza milk bread in there that is like kind of like an upgraded interpretation of this like pepperoni bread that I grew up eating in Ohio. Like it was like a very common thing that I would see at like my friends' houses. Like they made it for like fundraisers a lot of time, but it was like never really good. Like it was just bread like everywhere, but like it was never that good. I was like, why isn't there cheese in here? Why is it just like pepperoni and like just the dough? Like it needs like moisture or something. And so I kind of like took that memory and I was like, milk bread seems like the perfect bread for it. It has like that moisture and that like adding like good quality pepperoni with some cheese in there for moisture. Yeah, I kind of like I get asked that question a lot about like how I come up with my flavor profiles. They literally come from like the most random like corners of my life that I get inspiration from.
And you bring in a lot of the other Asian flavor as well, not just the Chinese, but other like the Japanese flavor and Southeast Asian flavor and all that. I think that's a really an exciting combination of flavors. There was someone that says, Kristina, please bite into one to let us see how crumbly they are.
Now, like the cookie will tell you when it's ready. Like you can kind of nudge it a little bit. Like once you can kind of like get a cookie off the counter like that, then it's like ready. So I'm gonna eat one. It's probably gonna crumble because I don't have a napkin. It's so like light, like literally melts in your like you can take a bite.
It's very light,
still a little sticky like on my hand, but it's like like a melt away effect.
Right.
And it tastes just like a Ferrero Rocher. Even has that kind of like a little bit of a crunch to it from like from the hazelnut flour.
Hazelnut, yeah.
It's not like crunchiness, like that outer layer of a Ferrero Rocher. They're really good.
So we're in the Chinese New Year season. Do you have any particular recipes in your book that that you would recommend for? That is one of them, but but do you have any other suggestion as to what people can do for the Chinese New Year?
Yeah, absolutely. So one really traditional recipe, that's in there, and it's one of my grandma's recipes. It's my grandma's like steamed cupcakes, or they're called like prosperity cakes or fago. But my grandma, I found through writing this recipe and asking her about like how she makes it, I found out that her secret ingredient is actually pancake mix, specifically Bisquick is her secret ingredient to making this like really traditional like Lunar New Year cake. But it's really easy. Just take Bisquick, some flour, brown sugar, and water, and you steam them in individual little cupcake molds, which is important.
Wow.
And then they like, it's not a frosted cupcake, but they like bloom and blossom.
Right.
And the taller, I'll show a picture, and the taller and kind of like more busted or like kind of like open they are, the more good luck you'll have in the new year. So you see these at Chinese Bakeries too, only kind of like during the new year. So that's like a really fun one. You can also make the fried sesame balls. Lunar New Year too. For something like a little bit more challenging and unique, you could make this, which my family always called my family always called it white pizza, but it's like white sugar cake or bai tonggo.
Pak tonggo, right?
Yeah. So, and that's a little bit more like, not hard to make, but it's just like a really unique process because you're using rice flour as a steamed cake again. There's also like yeast in it, so it's kind of like it's like a fermented rice cake thing. It gives it like a little bit of like a tang to it. It's like sweet and tangy. It's just like a really unique cake. And so if you're up for a challenge, that's also a really great cake to make during Lunar New Year. But I think that there's like anything out of here, I think would be really wonderful for Lunar New Year.
What about cookies? Any particular suggestion for cookies?
So like, as you probably know, a lot of Lunar New Year food is kind of like symbolic.
Symbolism, right? A lot of symbol, right?
Yeah. Symbolism based on like either like what the word sounds like or what it looks like. And so a few cookies, I think that would be good. So one would be like my grandpa's almond cookies, because they're like golden, round, circular, kind of look like the moon,
right?
Like look like gold,
like coin. Yeah.
Then you can also make these are good too, the coconut peanut mochi balls.
So that looks wonderful.
Yeah, and like so they are traditional like finding at Chinese bakeries, but for Lunar New Year a lot of times, or for Lantern Festival at the end, you make like glutinous rice balls like in like soup, like tong yuan. But if you wanted to make kind of like a sweet version that's like more like a confection, you can make these. And then one that came to mind are the Taiwanese pineapple cakes, because they're like golden, they look like bricks of gold.
Gold,
So I think this would be really great. And they last a long time. Like if you keep them, store them well, they last quite a bit.
Excellent. There was another question about what is your future project? If you have it, do you have any? Yeah.
I am working on a second cookbook. It's not a baking book, although there is a dessert chapter, but what I can say is that it's like a savory cookbook that draws a lot of inspiration from how my family like fed our family. My entire family lives in Ohio, so I always grew up with like having my grandparents over for dinner or going over to my cousins. It was just like constantly just like family dinners all the time. So the book is like capturing that spirit.
Great. That sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about, say, how to inspire the next generation of bakers in the US, the Chinese family that lived in America growing up with not cooking baked goods at home. Do you have any advice on how they can inspire them to start doing that?
Sure. And it's been something I've been thinking about a lot, and also I feel like writing my book was sort of like a therapeutic process for me to kind of like be able to answer that question, because I never I felt that same way of not knowing like how to kind of like move forward with like sharing food while also sharing my culture and still being myself. And I think for the first thing, it's like a mentality thing. I think a lot of times we kind of like hold back from wanting to create and share things because we feel a little bit too much pressure to kind of like show things in the most correct or authentic ways. At least for me, as like a Chinese American, that I didn't grow up in Hong Kong. I wasn't born there. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And I was like, how am I supposed to speak on like the most authentic version of Chinese food, even though I grew up eating it, like with my grandma making it, or her versions of it too. And I think in the last like 2 years or so, as I've been working on this, growing my career, I've learned to just accept that like it's better just to celebrate your culture in the unique way that you see your food and see your culture in. And don't worry too much about like making sure you're sharing like the most authentic version. As long as it's your version and it's real, then it's good.
Right.
And I think one
yeah, I was going to say that authenticity is a problem word. I think a lot of people. Yeah. How does one actually define authenticity? Right. I mean, it's like yeah. So it's a very. Go ahead.
I think it has like a lot of different definitions, and like it's not like I dislike that word. It's just like it's just not the appropriate word for everybody. Like I think that there's some people who have the authority to speak on like whatever the most authentic version of something is. It's just that I don't feel that authority in a way, because that's not exactly like how I cook. Like I cook a lot of Chinese food, a lot of Chinese food inspired by how my family cooks, but it's still like through a lens of me that's a little different. And I was just talking about my grandma's like steamed cupcakes, and I feel like when I was learning about that and testing it, I like was making the realization that like these cupcakes are a super traditional part of Lunar New Year and of like Chinese cakes and baking. But my grandma's using Bisquick because like she's using that, like she will never not use it. She's using it this year, like when she's making more for my family, you know, and like is someone else going to tell me that like that's not authentic in a way, even though she's been making it that way for like 60 years since she moved here.
Right.
Chinese food is like always evolving and adapting, and like I think all forms are valid.
Yeah, I guess all food is that way. All kinds of food get adapted over time into the modern era and so on. And so so it's difficult to try to define what authenticity is. I think that's very problematic. Yeah. So anyway, I hope there's more. Is there any more questions out there for Kristina? I guess I'm looking through here. There's not that much more. Is there something that you would like to share with other people about your journey into this?
I mean, it's like a constantly evolving thing, and I'm still learning to like, I guess like be a person that speaks about food like in this way, I guess. Like I'm still learning to kind of like accept the, I guess, praise in a way, and like feeling confident in saying that I'm a cookbook author. So I'm really thankful for the people who have purchased a book, come to these events, and are just like openly curious about it. So that's all I have to say. The book did just come back in stock. If you're even like thinking about getting it, I like wouldn't hesitate. There's been a lot of books printed for the first printing and even coming now, but like even with the first printing, it was sold out within a couple weeks, and that's why it was impossible to get for like 3 months. So if you're thinking,
that's really exciting that
Yeah.
you know, you sold out the first printing of the book. Yeah.
So it'll make a great Lunar New Year present if anyone wants to get it.
Definitely. There's a links on the chat to places where you can actually buy the book. So so please go ahead and, you know, support those independent bookstores, and you can buy them. So I guess, you know, at this point we are at the conclusion of this discussion, and I want to wish everybody Happy New Year. So let's see. I wonder if is Neil going to come back?
No, I think that's all. Yeah, I think just, you know, thank you so much. You know, just want to thank you, you know, Kian, for moderating the conversation, and then, you know, thank you, Kristina, you know, for really, you know, sort of introducing us to Chinese baking. I think lots of people comment about, like, you know, how they really appreciate the book, really solid focus on Chinese bakeries, you know, and then someone just commented, says substitution with almond flour and oat flour worked pretty well. You know, someone, right, that just cooked. I think, I'm sure they are enjoying it right now. I mean, even probably gonna make, you know, yeah, for the Lunar New Year. And then some people, you know, guess that, you know, they're definitely gonna check out the book, you know, and then they already feel hungry, you know. It's like, and also I think earlier someone mentioned, it's like they felt, you know, very calm, that like by just looking at you cook, it's like a zing, you know, it's like a good, very so I guess, you know, so yes, just want to thank you, yeah, so much for participating.
Maybe it'll be a TV show in the future or something.
Right.
Well, maybe, right? I mean, well, thank you very much, Kristina, for joining us here today.
Thank you so much.
It's been great talking to you. Okay.
Thanks.